Welcome back to the Pastor's Podcast. Pastor Scott here with a special, on location recording.
We are in Guam right now.
We are sitting in.
We're looking
Guam.
at the ocean, the blue ocean, sitting on the cliff line here at Bayview Church.
So Pastor Kevin Elwell is with me. I think a few of you listening probably know Pastor Kevin, but
What's up, Keith Orso?
So Kevin is the pastor of Bayview Church here in Guam. I've been out visiting the weekend, and Kevin's not joking. Like the view from your office, when it says Bayview is the name of the church, it's literally on a bluff overlooking. I'm going to try to describe this, like overlooking the bay of this aqua blue, crystal tropical water, with the reef that goes out to the outskirts of the bay where the waves only break on the reef.
A couple hundred yards out.
Yeah, so and then it's just this still, placid. I mean, what color is that, Laura? Laura's here too. Aqua.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't even know how to describe it.
It's a
Turquoise. There you go.
Okay. Yeah.
It's pretty good. So this is the view from your office.
Mm-hmm.
And not just from your office, but your house is on the same property.
Campus.
So it's also the view
church.
from your house.
Yes.
So do you get tired of it?
No. But like when we were driving around the island, there were some times where we were like talking about something and like we would turn the corner and then suddenly you could see like a bay and the green mountains and you would stop mid-sentence like, so I think the Lord, whoa. Like I think that we've been here so long that it's good for me to see that in you, because you do get used to it a lot. But, and in West LA, I didn't even have a window.
No,
so,
in your office.
Yeah, I was about. You guys tucked me. Put the kids pastor in the back corner. That's where I was. So.
Man, well, those offices have been out of commission for so long that like now half the church doesn't even know what the back corner is.
Well, once I put the arcade games in down there, I hung out down there. In the
youth room.
I feel the Lord wants me to prepare a message sitting down here in this room now. So.
Okay, so give a little bit of background here for those that don't know you. Kevin was a pastor at First Baptist Church of West LA, and during the time of the merge, actually, the merge was your idea. The merge of First Baptist and Shoreline to really the formation of Cornerstone Church as we know it.
You should have seen the look on Scott's face when I first said it. He was like, "I don't think so," but then what came out of his mouth was maybe. That's a crazy idea. I think that's what you said.
I think yeah. I wasn't convinced when you first. I was like, that sounds really complicated, but the Lord directed our churches together. And in a lot of different ways, we could tell stories about that time, but I actually want to hear more about what's going on now. The Lord directed our churches together. We formed Cornerstone Church of West LA. Our first service together was right after Easter, or it was Easter. It was Easter. It was Easter, and you don't have to whisper, Laura. It's okay. You could. She's like, don't record me. Like I don't want on this podcast. So it was on Easter, and then a couple months later, you moved here to Guam.
Yes.
Well, so how did that come about?
Well, you would have to go backwards before the merge when some people might be familiar. And I think you did some podcasts where you talked about this, where First Baptist Church went through a big transition itself where they were trying to move to a board of elders. We had like a 4-board system that had become an impediment for growth, really. But and in that, I'll use the word long dialogue with leaders of that at the church, there was going to be a vote, and it kind of had split into two groups of people that, half the church was with the deacons and pastors, Pastor Jim and myself, with transitioning to one board, slimming down to one board, and then half the church was with another board that wanted to keep it the same. And as we got close to the vote, one of I think it was Steve said to...
So this is Pastor Steve, for those who've been here for a while, yeah.
He said to me, looked at me, I was sitting in his office actually, and he said, you might want to fire up your resume, get your resume ready, if we lose the vote. I mean, and so that actually, I took that seriously, and even Pastor Jim, both of us. And that was the catalyst for me to look other places. And because that can, looking for another place of ministry can take a while. However, Guam was always in our hearts. We had spent 4 years here in the 90s. My wife moved here in high school. Her dad was the superintendent of a Christian school. That was the reason they came here. But she's from Idaho. She's a redhead. Whenever I say, my wife's from Guam, she's not local in that sense, an islander. But we came here and we served 4 years. I was a teacher at that Christian school. And we loved Guam so much. I went back to do seminary work. I felt the Lord was directing me into ministry full time. And it just kind of lingered. It stayed there. And there were times where I would talk to people that I knew here about coming back. But when that moment came where it says, fire up your resume, my brother, Matt, was here at this church, and I contacted him. He said, I think they're going to be looking for someone here. And that's what kind of opened that door. And he connected me to the pastor here at the time, and that began like a dialogue. So what I would say to you is that started me talking with the leadership here in Guam, but then in West LA, the time came for that vote, and praise the Lord, and by His providence and sovereignty, that there were a lot of changes there. The church voted in a way where we slimmed down to one board, and then I think it was after that. Oh, you have to help me out with that. I don't know when I said that to you. We should think about merging. I think it was before that. It was before that. It was pre-vote.
Like we began those conversations, but anyways, that's right. That obviously paved the way to
because we had a lot of conversations. I remember you, Brian, myself, Jim, and then we added Steve and Matt, where we were talking about a potential merge, and then we had to put that on pause because there was not going to be a merge if the vote went a certain way, right? Yeah. So you've got all these kind of multiple tracks going on at the same time.
Well, including you guys ending up out here in Guam. So okay, so there's so many stories from that time we could tell, but go ahead.
I think I know how to segue.
Okay.
What happened was when the vote passed, I didn't stop with the conversations with Guam because they had gone far enough that I began to really think maybe the Lord, that's where He wants us to be. But then the conversation about merging cycled back because of the vote, right?
So all of a sudden the merge took off, and so did your conversations
with Guam.
Guam.
And
church here with Bayview.
So there was this, I'll use the word awkward, but in a good way, where it's like I'm having conversations with Jim about the merge, and Jim was the lead guy, and I was really careful about those conversations. I didn't want if you were to go back and look at all of the words and sentences I said with Jim about it, I always leaned into him saying it has to be the final decision about this is you. If you feel the Lord is saying to you, don't go forward with the merge, then let's not do it. Because I felt like he needed to be the guy that owned it the most, because I knew there's the possibility that I wouldn't be there, right? And if it was me, like I want to own it and me, and then like 2 months later, all right, guys, I'm not here. That wouldn't be good. So I talked to Jim in a way that it was like this. I believe it'll work for these reasons. I spent time with Scott, a lot of time with Scott. I believe in him. I've seen his heart. Like that was the way I talk with Jim, to reinforce positively why I thought the Lord was moving with the merge. I really did believe in it. I believed that if we merged, I saw the leadership in you and Brian. I thought it was a really good match with what we had, like even giftings wise. What you do, what Brian does, what Jim does, how the Lord gifted me. Even though there was like, well, I don't know who will take over the kids and the youth, but and I always thought that was kind of funny because it was like in all our meetings, all like you and Brian especially, it was always like, well, that's a lot of kids. We don't have to worry about it because Kevin's gonna, And then I was thinking, well, so there was a little bit of heartache, okay.
But I mean, the Lord was so kind in that, right? In directing all of us through that. It founded, in that sense, kind of the modern iteration of that church, which is Cornerstone, which has been such a blessing over the last number of years. And I mean, long story short, you then did get the invitation here in Guam, and having that heart for Guam, that love that you and Missy had from being here before, from Missy growing up here, the Lord led you through that back to Guam that summer. And so it's been almost 14 years now, right? That you've been here. So and in that sense, like I feel like Bayview is kind of a sister church to Cornerstone, right? Like because of our relationships, because of, I mean, all the different connections. We could talk about all the other connections between Bayview here and Cornerstone
Spiegel.
too. Yep. John Spiegel and his dad who pastored here. But there's the Mendiolas and for people who at Cornerstone who know them, but I would love to hear about what the Lord's been doing over the last 14 years, particularly over the last decade. So a couple of years into your time here, maybe we'll skip over this. A couple years into your time here, you became the lead pastor.
Yeah.
here.
So when I first came, I was like an associate pastor. There was a lead pastor, but when he was kind of recruiting me, he told me, he says, I might be here another 5 years. So there was always this thought that I'm bringing a guy out that so that when the God moves me on, that there's someone here. But that ended up only being 2 years. Yeah. It was a little bit sooner than he thought. But man, those 2 years were great. It was really good to kind of be here in the church. And while I knew Guam in its culture and people, but the church is a whole nother culture, and like getting to exist in the church without the pressure of leading it as a lead elder was super helpful to me, which is kind of, again, circles back to God's sovereignty, how he worked a lot of things together, So then when they did ask me to step up and lead the church, I already had a lot of familiarity, about maybe what to preach and how and just who was in the church, and that was super helpful. So I took over as the lead elder, and I would say this: that church, I would describe it as a revitalization church. It needed to find life. It was an older church, more than 60 years maybe, and it had a time where it had grown large and then it was shrinking back down. But it had some big moments, like there was a super typhoon that came through and absolutely flattened the buildings. And the church had to then meet in a hotel while they built the buildings that are here now. And that in and of itself is kind of something that all the body corrals around, and that the Lord was with them and in that, and can be something that really pulls people together, right? Yeah. So, but when I came along, all that was past.
That was all past. Like that was all like the story of kind of who they were. In that sense, the strongest years of the church. But when you stepped in, the church wasn't necessarily in that place of growth.
It was searching more for direction and vision, and also it was just it was in decline in a number of ways. I mean, I've talked with you as you've been here about some of that. I don't know how much you want me to share, but I mean, I could get.
This is public, so you can share what you feel comfortable.
Okay, so well, I was just going to say, like,
well, okay, give us a little bit updated that. But what I really want to ask about is like the things that have stood and that have stood out over the last 10 years, like the gospel growth that you've seen, and as you look back over the last 10 years, the things that you've seen God do that you couldn't have done, that the church couldn't have done, but that like I just feel like in our time together over the last few days and the times that we've gotten to spend together, both catching up and touring the island and meeting your people and spending time with your people, like God's just been at work, strengthening, transforming lives. And I'm curious, just it's stood out to me as something that's been honestly, one of the most encouraging things I've seen in a long time. And I'm curious what of that stands out to you as you've seen God move. What are some of the ways in which that have brought you the most encouragement? You're like, wow, God really is at work in this place and moving in His people.
Oh man, there was a lot there.
I'm sorry.
I'll try to take it in parts. Let me just say first that after I took over as the lead elder, I felt like the focus needed to be on how to grow the church, how to have a vision for growing. And so the focus was very, very much, the first 10 years was how to be more healthy as a church and what kinds of things should we be focused on. And so we said we're not going to do that. We need to do this.
I love that because you're like, the church needs to grow. So step one is, how do we get more healthy? Right? I think sometimes churches are like, how do we grow? Okay, what are the things we need to do, or the new program we need to do? And this is what just resonates with me so much about, it's why we connected back then. It's why we have such a great friendship all along. But I'm so encouraged by the idea that if the church needs to grow, step one is, how do we get healthy? And in a sense, grow in a natural way from that health. Yeah.
And so I'll give you this little tidbit, which might help, is that when they built the new buildings, they took a loan out. There was a heavy mortgage every month payment. But I'm here only 2 or 3 months, and I take a pay cut because there's not enough giving to meet the demands of both the ministry and also that mortgage, right? So, and some of the response within the leadership was, we need to ask people to give more. And I remember writing this email to the other elders saying, we need to focus on how to grow the church, because we can't keep asking an ever shrinking giving base to give more. Let's focus on growing the church. And how do we do that? And that might be like a little bit of the genesis of that vision, let's look at growing the church. And one of the things that was said to me also when I first became the lead elder was, hey, we've had a lot of people over the years that have left our church and they're at other churches. We just need to figure out how to get them back. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Let's figure out how to reach people not in church. How do we reach the people that aren't in church? And so, those things might be a way to kind of characterize like that out of the gate kind of leading. So I would say that if you hit the 10-year, we're going into that 10-year mark, and the church is kind of incrementally, God has grown it, and I wasn't sure. Because I told my wife when we left West LA, I was like, if we go, we have to stay at a minimum 10 years. Because after talking with my brother, I was like, he kind of gave me an idea about what was the church. And now, mind you, remember, First Baptist there's some similarities. It was a little bit in decline. It was an older church. It was bloated in the sense of how many ministries. I remember Steve and I, there was this list that was put together, and this sheet of paper was like 80 something ministries or seats you need to fill, kind of positions you need to call people to help us with. It was almost all of it was internal. It wasn't outreaching. So there was some similarities like that, but so God in His graciousness, the church, going to that 10 years had grown. So, COVID comes. Now, we had grown to the point where we had one service and it was full, and then I saw us shrink down. It's like there's like this ceiling where like we fill to capacity, but then people aren't, if there's no seats, they don't stay. They're gonna, so
Let's
began.
plant that seed, because I think people at Cornerstone need to hear it. When there's not seats, people don't stay. And we have to figure out other ways to go. But
yeah. So we grew, and then we would shrink some, and then we'd grow back up and then shrink some. But always the growth was to that ceiling.
Yeah.
It was like maybe around 400 people. So COVID, man, this is how. I remember somebody asked John Piper, what is God doing with COVID? And his answer was probably a million different things, Well, one of those things at our church was we were forced to go to 2 services and no one complained, because
everybody needed some space. You needed your
no,
social
but
distancing?
there was a mandate by our governor that you could not do anything. I'm talking like from restaurants to gymnasiums, whatever the max capacity is. Like that there's a fire code. You can't have more than 500 people in this building. Whatever it was, and it was low when she first started. It was like 25%. So if the max capacity was 100, you couldn't have more than 25 people in that building. That hurt a lot of restaurants. They're trying to figure out how to get more people, but they're limited by that. So it was kind of island wide. Everybody dealt with this in a lot of layers, right? So we are so to go to your church says, hey, we have to go to 2 services, and people are like, okay, there's no pushback on that, and
you never went back.
And we never went back. As we came out of COVID, because there's a period where I did a lot of live stream from my my office, because we couldn't meet at all. Like we were not allowed to meet at all for a while, but there was incrementally. Then we were allowed to meet, but at this capacity. Then it went from 25% to, 40%. I can't remember what they were. And slowly we got back to 100%, but we never went back to 1 service. That was such a blessing. And I remember I used to think, okay, as we went back to 100%, I was like, what's going to happen? Everyone's going to want to go back to 1 or go back to, they're going to all come to the second service, which the second service was the closest to the original time of 1 service. And I just used to think, if we could just get like 100 people in that first service, it would take them out of the second service and give space to grow. And so I remember coming to the first service, and it was like, first time was like, okay, we got 50, 60s. And then to slowly see that, okay, 70, 75, okay. And then one day it was like, we got 100 people in the first service, woo! and it's just kept growing 100 up to 150. It kind of stabilized around 150, but I think today we had around 180-ish in that first service. But imagine all those people trying to be in that second service. You saw the second service. There's no way you're fitting. No way you're fitting 180 in that second service.
Yeah. Right? That ship sailed in a sweet way.
So now, as you saw, that second service is full. Now our strategy is how do we get some of these people to go to the first service? Some of that has to do with kids ministry.
Exactly.
But that takes you up to about where we're at right now.
Okay, so one of the things that stood out to me this morning, so we're recording this on Sunday, Saturday night, California time. They're going to watch the Super Bowl Monday morning here.
It's true.
Anyways. We're actually. Let me take a step back, because I wanted to ask this at the beginning of our interview and I didn't. We've been talking about the island of Guam, where you are. Can you describe for people where the island of Guam is? I think most people listening, like if you just gave them kind of a blank map and you're like, point to where Guam is. I think like
I'm sure there's someone.
You think a quarter of them would get it right? Well, if that, maybe.
Yeah, you might have led with that. I'm sure there's somebody who already Googled it. They're like this far into the podcast.
Exactly.
Where is Guam?
I should have done this 20 minutes ago. But okay, where's Guam?
So one way I describe it is most people know where Hawaii is. You fly to Hawaii. It's depending where you're coming from, 5 hours or 8 hours flight. Guam is another 8-hour flight past Hawaii. Not in a straight line. It would kind of angles more south. So that gives you an idea right there, another 8-hour flight. But like you guys, I routed you guys through Japan. Mm-hmm. I like that flight better. And then you come backwards 3.5 hours. But we're close to the Philippines. Philippines is about I'm going to get this wrong, maybe 2.5, 3 hours. I think it's 3-hour flight. Mm-hmm. So we are, past Hawaii that far, but not as far as the Philippines.
But way closer to the Philippines than to Hawaii.
Yes.
way closer to Japan than Hawaii. I mean, we're only maybe a couple hour flight south.
That's true as well.
Basically directly south of Japan.
Yes.
So, okay.
Is that helpful?
I think so. Right. So, okay. So this is where Guam, this U.S. territory. So one of the things that stood out to me, and it's actually not, it's actually related to the fact that Guam is a island with the Chamorro native people who were here, but kind of first in that sense. There's still a large number of Chamorro people here. There's a lot of Filipino people here.
Yeah, some say more Filipinos than Chamorro.
A lot of Korean, Japanese people here, but there's also 2 really large U.S. bases.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of military personnel from
Did you get that
the
sense
mainland.
as you were preaching today?
Okay, so I was, one of the things that stood out to me, this is what I want to talk about. One of the things that stood out to me about the service this morning was how diverse it was. It's a really, like, the local church, more than anywhere else I've seen on the island, was a place where people from all those different backgrounds were gathered together. I think we've been to different parts of the island, and you don't see that same kind of mixture that we saw this morning, where there's a number of people, and not just that, but there's people from all the different small islands. Around here from Yap. I talked to a couple from Yap.
Micronesian. You did?
I did.
I think it was Paul and Bettina. Yeah.
And yeah, from Micronesia and islands and stuff like that. And so the church today was super diverse. Now, the thing that stood out to me, the military presence here felt a lot like the college presence at Cornerstone. At Cornerstone, you have these like groups of young adults that are all sitting together. And at Cornerstone, they're all UCLA students, or at least college students. And here, they're all military guys. Right?
And some women too.
And some women,
but
yeah.
A lot of guys, yeah.
The whole crew that was sitting up in front of me, in front of us, was like, at least that crew was all men.
Yes,
was all young men, right? Probably in their early 20s.
20s, in the 20s, yeah.
And so, I mean, it was really encouraging to see the diversity. And has that always been a part of Bayview? Is that something that the Lord's been doing?
Well, there's always been, that has been. I could tell you, like, the history of the church. The very first thing on this campus it's called our center building. It's where you were in the third session yesterday.
Okay, yeah. That
building was started built and it was a ministry to military. So if you go back 70 years, they did not have the as strong of like a chaplaincy presence to minister to the base people. And so they started that here, and then that grew, and they said, hey, we need to plant a church out of this. So it's always had a military presence within our church, but the diversity has also always been there as well. But your question, for my time here, I would say that there was a point where people used to describe our church as a white church. As it's mainly military. It's a military. That's how they would say
church,
it. By saying white, what they mean is there aren't that many locals, in the church. And then recently, somebody, they would say there's a lot more brown skin, because Filipino, Micronesian, local Chamorros, that's how they would, that's their characterization of it, And there was a time around that 10-year mark where I kind of got tired of people saying, it's mostly a military, it's a white church. And there was a service where I was preaching, and I said, I want you to stand up if you are not military. And all these people stood up, and nobody's ever said that again. They're like, wow, there actually are a lot of non-military people in this church, And
that's one of the things that stood out to me, because I felt like there must be a natural gravitation to have kind of just military churches, right? Churches that are just that would be a natural dynamic, but that's not what Bayview felt like at all to me. I don't know about you, Laura. Like that was it was striking. What a just sweet and powerful, demonstration of the gospel, that kind of diversity and people, and not just in presence, but just in relationships, right? You can see a bit, whether it's the stage, people on stage, but also just the relationships and everything going on. Like there's just a family, this really diverse family. Nature.
You know that I finished up my doctorate during that first 10 years.
Yeah.
And part of the vision of the church came from the work on that. And I remember I had to go, you've done a doctoral thesis where you have to defend them. And I had this, the way that the thesis was the revitalization of Bayview, and the strategy was kind of a blended model. Like, so your counseling background, mine is church revitalizing, kind of. That was the track I did, and when I went and had to defend it, there were professors who were like, "This isn't going to work. I don't think it's going to work. You can't have two models. You can only have one model." And so, like, when I use the word model, just for if people to familiarize you, like, one model might be attractional. Like, we're going to have programs that attract people. So military families come to the island, they're looking for a kids program. So we have like a kids program and that or maybe a certain worship style, right? And I get that. And I actually was like, we need a measure of that, because we are always having people leave every summer. There was a summer we had 100 people leave our church, PCSing back to the States. So
and by that I mean military people that are going back to the States.
But when I say 100, it's like the wife and the kids, like they're all part of that, right?
Yeah.
So there's always this almost like a replacement, like when new military come in, replacing families that left. But I said to our leaders, and I say this to other pastors today, God doesn't place our church here to reach. We could actually live in that cycle, always trying to just growth by capturing those kind of people, but we'll never reach the local people. What's your strategy for being a local? Because it's totally different. They are not going to come to your church because of something that is attracting them to your campus. The island is predominantly Catholic. You and I have talked some about it. 90% Catholic. Catholics are not going to come. They're to your church like that. And many of them are disenfranchised Catholics, which we've talked some about why. Yeah. But do you know how those people end up? You go out and you live in the culture. And Laura said, I love the Bible verse she had on the sign as you're driving out of the parking lot is about that. It's out of Jeremiah, and serving and living in the city and in the culture. And if it finds its blessing, you will find your blessing there. And so we began to shape in those first 10 years a vision for how do I shape within our congregation to be missionaries to the culture. That the goal isn't just to bring them to a campus. It's like, we're going to go live alongside you, and we care about you, and we want to have a life with you if you never come to our campus, right? Yeah. And so I tried to live that way myself. That's one of the reasons, like, I got so involved in the soccer community, because I have a soccer background and I'm coaching, and some people have come to our church through that. Some people have come to our church because of the fitness of my son Ethan and Missy, who
they were fitness coaches, and
Ethan went to the CrossFit Games, and he was in the paper. He was out there. People know him. He was on, like, I drive by. He was on like the billboard. Like the phone company said, come. And people say, oh, you're Ethan's dad. Like, I'm known by my son. And then my wife began the same thing. People love my wife as a coach, but they might have been in the gym for like a year. And Missy's coaching them, and they go, I'm going to come check out your church. Like, just living, like, it wasn't a program on your campus. It was how you lived alongside them in a certain way, so that we reach the local community. Because I thought, man, it's a sad thing if we were to spend a decade or 2 decades. People love my wife as a coach, but they might have been in the gym for like a year, and Missy's coaching them, and they go, I'm going to come check out your church. Like, just living, like, it wasn't a program on your campus. It was how you lived alongside them in a certain way, so that we reach the local community. Because I thought, man, it's a sad thing if we were to spend a decade or 2 decades, and all the people that we reached were primarily already churched people who have circled here. Yeah. All we've done is I used to use the term traded silos. They went from, if churches were like a silo, they went from that silo to this silo, and it's always like Jesus is like, he's standing there looking at the field, and he's like, look at the harvest is great. And all we care about is the already harvested grain that's just trading silos. Like, how do we reach the unharvested grain? So
Amen.
that's been the vision. Those first 10 years is to become a church that could do that, this dual model. So then I had to go in and defend that. And this one professor was like, this is not going to work, So, but part of me was like, but you've never been to Guam. That was kind of my...
Well, it's, and that, okay, part of that is I'd love to see the way in which you're taking so many of these shared priorities and principles that we have, that vision and that heart for the city, that actually I think a part of what Cornerstone is today was shaped by your heart when you were there.
That's why I liked you when I was there.
Exactly,
we had a common ground there.
But the way in which that's been contextualized here in Guam, right? It's taken shape in a unique way because of your not only understanding of Guam, but the time that you guys have spent here just as students, as learners.
Yeah, time is an important word.
Okay, so I want to ask about that because you guys have been here a while, but you're here for the long haul.
Yeah.
And most people
are not
in Guam, whether they're here for the military or not. They're not here for the long haul. How does your thinking about that and your commitment, your family's commitment to be here, to live here, for this to be your life, how has that shaped kind of ministry, that heart, and maybe provided opportunities that you only get when you grow roots in a place, even in a place that lots of other people don't grow roots?
Yeah. Ooh, again,
well, because I think that there's a lot of parallels here. I mean, I think when I describe that, I think a lot of people listening are like, that kind of sounds like West LA. Like, setting up roots in a place that not everybody can live, that a lot of people don't grow roots in.
Right, but like you were called to West LA. Like I've heard your story about you were walking down the street looking around about this is a place to reach. Like you had to walk down the street. I had 4 years as a teacher here, and then fell in the 90s and fell in love with the island. But I think I'm just going to take a stab at this, and you can direct it. But it's like, in one sense, it's not a profession. You might even be called to be a pastor, but it's a whole other calling to be called to a place. You're called to West LA. I'm called to here. And I think that's part of it. And I have conversations with pastors who are coming out here. There's so many little churches here that don't have a pastor, and they're always bringing someone. They're looking at it, and that's one of the things I'm always looking at is you're looking for a job or you feel called to this or not.
Place.
Because I don't know what the statistics are, but it's some like pastors usually only stay around 2 to 3 years in one place, and they move around a lot. But I think that you can't. I mean, I'm sure there's a place where you can be effective, like for a time where you go in for that short. But if you're reaching locals, and especially
you're reaching locals in any place,
right? And I was just about to say that there used to be a time where you might think of the U.S. where there's a lot of places you go and there was a lot of common ground, but it's almost like subcultures everywhere, like someone from this city, you're going to have to live and understand their culture than another city in the U.S. And its diversity is growing and growing and growing. And here, the island is diverse. There's so many cultures. There's you and I we were talking about how you might have two families from the island of Yap, but they speak different languages. Their actual Yapese is different. They come from different islands. A lot of these, when you say like the island of Yap, it's actually 4 main islands, and Palau is hundreds of islands, The Philippines is 2,000 islands, like my secretary Yira, you heard where she's from. It takes like a flight and another flight and a boat trip and another boat trip to get to where she's at, and the culture there is very different than the culture in Manila, maybe. So,
okay, so and this is one of the things that's been so encouraging to me is it's not just you who's made this choice, but it's not just pastors. But I met other people, and even now, right, they become some of your elders. But pastors aren't the only ones called here. but God's building up a number of people, people who grew up here, people who've come here, who stay here in Guam for the sake of the kingdom.
Yeah, I think our eldership,
the Lord's doing.
Our eldership reflects that. Jeff Jones, I told you there's a picture of him, I think, in diapers, in this church, 60 years ago or something like that. He's been here forever, but they came from North Carolina. Andrew, our elder, he came here as a doctor with the Navy. They loved it here and they stayed here, and they feel called to be here. Pancho immigrated from the Philippines. He's a leader here. Steve came here. He was a colonel in the Air Force, and they loved it here, and they've stayed here. So it's a blending, right, of local and people who have come here from other places.
Yeah.
But I have a thought, if I can pivot. Is that okay?
Totally. Pivot to your last thought, and then we'll kind of wrap things up.
Because the 10-year mark, right, and COVID hits, and then I'm thinking, how much longer are we going to be here? And we have felt like the Lord has called, given me kind of a direction for the next 10 years, because the church has become healthy, and one of the things that came out of COVID was this GMA thing, right? So, and that's unique. We were talking about that.
Okay. So what's the GMA?
So the GMA, it stands for Guam Ministerial Association. It's an association of local pastors, but diverse in its denominations, right? So we have a Lutheran pastor, we have a Presbyterian, we have a Baptist, and all the variety of Baptists. So we have non-denominational. There's a few charismatic pastors in there, and so why would you be part of that, right? So what happened in COVID was one pastor said, a lot of the pastors on the island don't know how to respond to the governor because of these restrictions. And is there a place, can we get together and talk, basically? And so it ended up to truncate the story, coming to our church, meeting in the center, where you spoke. And then what grew out of that was then we kind of facilitated this dialogue. And it encouraged pastors. And then I had pastors that were calling me and saying, what is the rule right now? How do we respond? And we would dialogue about that. Do we have to wear the mask? Are we mandated to wear the mask? And so, but then as we came out of that, a pastor came to me and said, would you consider being the president of the GMA? Because what's happening right now, there's a lot of life. This has actually brought the pastors together. And the GMA itself was in decline. There wasn't a lot of interest. They'd have a meeting and there'd be 5 guys maybe. And so that opened a whole nother thing, and that has become part of our vision as a church. Is we exist not just for ourselves. We exist I often say it this way. We exist to create and build gospel-centered communities of people. That could be small groups within our church, but it could be planting a church, which is something that we've done, helping a church revitalize, which is something we've done. But now it's also encouraging other pastors, how they can grow, how they you get a guy that comes from the States, and like the Lutheran pastor you met, and we go to coffee.
I really enjoyed meeting him. He's a solid guy.
Yeah, really, and so pastor to pastor is kind of my goal, connecting pastors to pastors, where you can have that encouragement, but then also church to church, connecting churches to churches. And there's a way in which when we connect churches together, we can collectively have a spiritual footprint that is larger to the lost community of the island. And the way that I always help people catch that vision is with the foster kids, which I was telling you about. So you have to hear this again. But it's like, first year I was here leading, 150, 160 foster kids on the island. Today, 700 foster kids. So every year in November, we have Foster Kids Sunday or Orphan Sunday. every year I preach a message and we challenge our church for there's different ways people can respond, but the thing I really desire is for more families to come forward and say, we'll be foster parents, right? And every year God leads sometimes we've had 5, we'll become foster. And so then CPS and the government has become familiar with the churches that are supporting taking care of the orphans and fosters on the island. Now imagine this. If every church on the island had an Orphan Sunday and every church had 1 or 5 families come forward, look at that spiritual footprint of God's church. Didn't matter if you were a family from the Lutheran Church. They just see God's church together coming forward, taking in foster kids, right? And so that's a way, like through the GMA. So you met Mona. They're the only women's shelter. So you have someone like Mona, you have someone like Bethany, she runs the Harvest House, which by the way, we didn't have to create it. It already existed. And I told our leaders, there's this Harvest House. It's a Christian nonprofit. They're trying to reach the foster kids. Let's just go support them and join them in their effort. But I got the leader from Harvest House to come to GMA. They spoke, and then they got invited by the other churches to come speak in their churches, and more families came forward. So pastor to pastor, churches to churches is kind of that GMA vision.
And that's, I mean, again, just a part of it. I'm so thankful you're sharing a little bit about this, because this is a part of what has been such an encouragement to me, and that I wanted to share with our church family. To see the work that the Lord's doing, how God's working in Guam, how he's working through you. I mean, somebody who means a lot to a lot of us back at Cornerstone, and to this, in that way, like sister church here in Guam. And so there's a lot of that actually that I feel like has shaped us. I mean, it's a lot of your heart that shaped us in those early years of Cornerstone. And I know there's a lot of pieces of that are even shaped us, Laura and I, in our time here, and just bring me back with a excitement and passion for those things that the Lord's doing here, to continue to see the Lord doing those same things in the unique context of West LA as well. So as we wrap up, how can we as Cornerstone be praying for Bayview? There are any specific ways we can be lifting?
I would say two things off the cuff come to my mind. And you've met Pancho. This is his first week, and there's a whole story that I don't have time for, how he's come back and he's part of our leadership team here, and the reason we brought him on is to help us with our own growth. I keep feeling like my heart's desire is that we can figure out how to get over the hurdles that a lot of other pastors have, so that then they come and they have, how did you figure that out? So that we can be ministry to other pastors on this island. And some of those are growth problems, right? Like you said, there's not enough room. We gotta figure out how to do more with our kids ministry to help, So I think continuing to be faithful at stewarding Bayview itself, because it is central to like, I want to be an example, and it's life-giving. It's life-giving not just to people and families within the Bayview community, but much, much broader now. And I didn't even have time to get into the Pacific Church Network. Yeah. And like that's going to go even broader towards Asia. Jim Smith coming up. We're hosting the Pacific Church Network. All the pastors that are from India, from Myanmar, from Philippines are coming here next fall. I went to them in Japan to the conference and met a lot of. That's just like, that was so humbling. Like we're trying to figure out how to overcome a growth barrier here. They're like, Myanmar's like we're in a civil war. They're trying to survive in the midst of a civil war. India, they're under persecution. Japan, there's a very less than 1% is Christian. Like their problems are totally different. Like that was humbling and like ministering to me. But anyways, the first thing I would say is like Bayview to me is life-giving beyond its own campus, and that we can continue to be really faithful at stewarding that. And then the second part I would say is just praying as we go outward like that. How what's this new thing through the Pacific Church Network, that they're all going to come here? How can we, like pastor to pastor, church to church here, how can we, I don't know what the next word is, culture to culture, how can we now extend that to the churches and the pastors that are not even in Guam?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, you guys are such a blessing and encouragement, and this time's been really, I know we've talked about it, but this time's been really, really sweet for Laura and I. So thanks so much for the invitation, for the opportunity to teach yesterday, and for the conference we did together here, for the opportunity to preach here. I feel like we've received even more than we've given in our time. So thanks so much.
I just want to say we love you guys. And I have sometimes looked back and wish that I'd stayed, because I know how close we would have grown.
Yeah.
And but we know we're where God wants us. I miss a lot of the people in West LA, dear friends. But my thought is always we have all eternity. So to be faithful where God puts us. And so thank you for coming. It took what, 12 years or something to get you here? It doesn't have to be another 12 years.
It doesn't. For sure. Well, thanks again, man. Thanks for the time. Thanks for your faithfulness. And thank you all for listening. Thanks for being a part of this. I just encourage you, please be praying for Bayview, for the Elwells, and for the work of the Lord here on Guam. It's so humbling to get to see it. I'm so glad we got to share it with you. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this with you. We love you, and we'll see you. We will. We'll be back in town next Sunday. So we'll see you on Sunday.
God bless.